And live now for remarks from Democratic lawmakers and issue-specific organizations on their support for H.R. 1. It's one of the first pieces of legislation by the Democratic majority, the bill aiming to address voting rights, ethics, and campaign finance. Live coverage here on C-SPAN 3. It's just getting underway.
Introduction of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, without this broad, strong grassroots coalition that has been working for years to get us to this moment where we can show the American people that we want to restore their voice. We want to give them ownership back of their own government. That's what this is all about. We called it the For the People Act because we thought Abraham Lincoln was a pretty good place to go to get some phrasing, and he talked about a government of, by, and for the people. And when you look at what this H.R. 1 bill will do, making it easier, not harder, to vote in America, strengthening ethics and accountability, and pushing back against the influence of special interests, you understand that at its core, this stands for the people. So we're tremendously excited about that. Democrats, of course, want to open the government, but we also want to open the democracy. And that's what this is all about: accountability, transparency. We know that most Americans, according to the polls, look at Washington, they look at Congress, they're very skeptical, they're cynical about whether their voice actually matters here. They know the price we pay every day for the undue influence that special interests have up here on Capitol Hill. They know that it's harder to protect clean air and clean water when the fossil fuel industry has undue sway. They know that it's harder to get good jobs, raise the minimum wage, do the right thing on the economy and tax policy when Wall Street calls the shots. They know that we can't get to the kind of sensible gun safety measures we need in this country when the gun lobby has too much influence here in Washington. They know that it's hard to address the cost of prescription drug prices when Pharma is the one calling the shots with an army of lobbyists and plenty of cash to spread around. They know the cost of this. What they didn't know until now was whether we were serious about trying to fight back against that undue influence. But the For the People Act, H.R. 1, is our statement that we are absolutely serious about making that happen. I want to again thank the coalition. All who you're going to hear from and many others have made it possible for us to be here to seize the moment, to tell Americans across the country who felt left out and locked out for too long that you're back. This is the year democracy makes a comeback, and H.R. 1 is going to be part of that effort. I'm incredibly delighted to introduce the next person. Can I introduce Katie? Yes. The next person you're going to hear from, Congresswoman Katie Porter from California. I had the opportunity to travel to California. We did an event together in her district. Nobody understands better than she does the power of this message and promise to the American people of cleaning up Washington and unrigging the system. She knows that that touched a nerve, and she leaned into that message, and she was rewarded by being elected from California's 45th district. The bargain that her class made with the electorate was, if you give us the gavel, if you return the Democrats to the majority, we will turn around and give you your democracy back. So she represents dozens and dozens of new members of Congress who came here understanding the power of this message, this narrative, this promise of taking back our country and returning to a government of, by, and for the people. Katie Porter.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here as a new member, and especially thankful for two things: to be joined by so many wonderful leaders and advocates, and to have a very warm coat. Very cold compared to California. But what Congressman Sarbanes said about the way in which the newly elected members campaigned on this issue is exactly right. So when people would say, as so many voters did, how are you going to make progress on health care? How are you going to make progress on climate change? How are you going to make progress on prescription drugs or consumer protection or education? The answer was, we have to make sure the fundamental machinery of our democracy is working for the people. And that's what this bill does. Three core areas: in strengthening voting rights, incredibly important. Second area, cracking down on corruption. This is not a new problem, but it's one in which I think the American people are newly engaged on. We deserve the highest ethical standards from our leaders, regardless of their party or their positions on partisan politics. Everyone should be held to high ethical standards. And the third part, of course, campaign finance. It is long past time to reduce the influence of big money on politics, and this bill does that. It creates a small dollar matching program that will reward those who are running grassroots campaigns of the kind that I did. I was proud on my campaign trail, as Congressman Sarbanes said, to make campaign finance reform a key platform. And I'm the first Democrat to represent my area in ever. We got back 100 years and kind of got lost on the district drawing, but part of the way that I appealed to a wide demographic in Orange County was by making it clear that I'm going to listen to the people of my district and the people of this country and not listen to special money politics. So I, as Congressman Sarbanes said, am here on behalf of my entire freshman class who ran on this issue, dozens and dozens of us who led the way in setting new standards around how we think about campaign finance. We are living proof that you can get elected in tough seats by doing what's right on special interest money, not by taking special interest money. So I am so proud to have the support of all of those leaders behind me in moving H.R. 1 forward, and I cannot wait to join you again to celebrate its passage as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
We're excited today to be able to bring together through the Declaration for American Democracy a really broad range of civic organization leaders. I'm going to introduce them all now. They'll each introduce the person who follows them afterwards. The upside is we've got a lot of messages we want to share. The downside is it's kind of cold and we want to go quick. So we are going to show democratic discipline and solidarity towards each other and towards all of you by limiting our comments to just about 90 seconds each. The first person speaking will be Fred Wertheimer, the president of Democracy 21. He will be followed by Chris Shelton, the president of the Communication Workers of America, then Leah Greenberg, the co-executive director of Indivisible, Hillary Shelton, the senior vice president of policy and advocacy at the NAACP, Neera Tanden, the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, Josh Horwitz, the executive director of the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, Rhea Carey, the executive director of the National LGBTQ Task Force Action Fund, Michael Keegan, the president and CEO of People for the American Way, Bishop Garrison, the interim executive director of the Truman National Security Project, Vinita Gupta, the president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, then Debbie Sees, the federal campaigns and legislative director at the Sierra Club. So we will have a long list to go through. Fred, set a good example.
I'll try. Can't guarantee anything. H.R. 1 reflects the fact that our democracy is at a crossroads. We have a broken political system and a corrupt campaign finance system. The American people know it, and they strongly object to it. This bill is a holistic approach to dealing with the problems of Washington influence money corruption, secret money in our elections, voter suppression, extreme partisan gerrymandering, and flawed government ethics rules. I want to briefly address two aspects of the battle that begins with H.R. 1. We cannot and will not end influence money corruption in Washington without providing candidates with the small donor matching fund system found in H.R. 1. It simply will not happen given the campaign finance system that was enacted by the Supreme Court. The new financing system is essential to end candidate dependency on big money funders, to empower ordinary Americans, and to greatly reduce the power and influence of big money funders. Secondly, we do not enter this battle wearing rose-colored glasses. We know this battle will be difficult and will take time. We envision a 3 to 5 year battle, but this fight will not stop until H.R. 1 is enacted. It took 5 years to enact the McCain-Feingold law over the obstructionist tactics and unyielding opposition of then Senator McConnell, now Senate Majority Leader McConnell. In the end, the McCain-Feingold law was enacted in a year with a Republican president, a House controlled by Republicans, and a Senate controlled by Democrats by one vote. So do not be mistaken with the idea that because this bill is not going to pass the Senate in this Congress, it's not going to be enacted. It is going to be enacted. Public outrage played a central role in winning the reform battle in 2002. Citizens will rise up again to win this battle. This fight is on. Thank you. And now let me introduce Chris Shelton.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Congressman Sarbanes for working tirelessly, and I mean tirelessly, to get this bill passed. And, you know, the other thing, I have a message for the Democrats. You guys are the majority now. We could have these press conferences inside in the wintertime. CWA stands strong for legislation and urges its passage. Our democracy is broken and in crisis. CWA members know it. For too long, our members have engaged in elections only to find their ability to vote restricted or hindered. Their voices drowned out by billions of corporate dollar funds pouring into elections, and their access to their representatives cut off by well-financed corporate lobby efforts. CWA members believe that Washington is rigged against the interests of ordinary working people. They are growing increasingly apathetic as they see Washington focused on things like the tax cut for Wall Street rather than secure and stable jobs for them and their families. They are crying out for anyone to bring our democracy back to its founding principles of we the people, not we the well-connected with huge bank accounts. That's why we are so excited that this is the first major piece of legislation introduced by House Democrats, and why we will work with our friends and allies to see that it is passed quickly. And we will make sure our members and the public know who is on their side to take our democracy back for we the people and who stands in their way. So thank you again, Congressman Sarbanes, and let's get it on and let's get this bill passed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah Greenberg, co-executive director of Indivisible. Indivisible is a grassroots network of thousands of local communities that sprung up after the 2016 election, dedicated to resisting Trump and to fighting for progressive values. These folks, the groups that we represent, people who helped to build the blue wave, are excited to see the new Democratic majority in Washington and expect that new Democratic majority to be bold and to demonstrate their vision for a bold progressive future. And H.R. 1 does exactly that. It is a comprehensive package for campaign finance reform, for voting rights and access, taking on corruption in politics. It is the kind of visionary work that we need to see, and we know that it is so important because we cannot achieve and we cannot sustain any of our other progressive priorities without these fundamental reforms to our democracy. Now, this is an issue that the grassroots is passionate about. On the first day of Congress, we had more than 160 events in districts nationwide. That is our single biggest day of action, with people showing up in Democratic and Republican districts alike, telling the new incoming majority we expect to see them standing strong. We expect to see this be a bold and comprehensive package. Do not want to see it watered down in any way, and are excited to see it move quickly in the incoming Democratic Congress. Now, we were founded after 2016, but we know it's not about resisting Trump. It's about resisting the forces that allowed him to rise in this democracy, and that means taking on these fundamental problems. And that is why we are so excited about this legislation and so excited to see it move forward. All right. And I'm going to introduce Neera Tandon, President of CAC.
Thanks, Leah. I am the president of the Center for American Progress and the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and I am thrilled to be part of this fantastic large-scale coalition. You see some of its representatives here, but it represents a much larger group of people around the country. And I think many of us have worked on these issues for a long time, and I do think we're at a crossing point. I do think that people are making the deep connections between democracy and a rigged system that is hurting their own pocketbook. We saw in this election cycle and over the last 2 years, essentially a system that passed legislation only for conservative donors, in which the deficit went up because of the tax bill, and essentially special interests were the only ones profiting. So our democracy is corrupted by a system that we are trying to fix. And that corruption is hurting working people, working families, people around the country. That connection was made in debates, in campaigns, and people understand that the democracy and what's happening to their pocketbook are not two separate issues. That's why H.R. 1 is so important. And it is so critical that it is H.R. 1, the first bill, because people in our country understand that we are not going to get the health care we need, a tax system we need. We're not going to fight inequality until our government is working for people again. That is why this legislation is so critical. That is why a broad progressive coalition is going to work night and day to see it passed out of the House. And I'm not giving it 5 years, okay? I'm saying we are going to see this pass, if not with this president, then the next president, who I hope will be here 2 years. So I'm accelerating the timeline for all of us here, okay? Because I don't think we have years to save our democracy. We don't have a decade to save our democracy. We have to do it these years now. And I'm excited to be here with everyone else. And to introduce Josh, I'm actually going to go Hillary Shelton, Senior Vice President of Advocacy at the NAACP.
So, well, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Hillary Shelton, Director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau, and serve as Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy. So on behalf of the NAACP, the Chair of our National Board of Directors, Mr. Leon Russell, the President and CEO of the NAACP, Mr. Derek Johnson, our 2,200 membership units in every state throughout the United States, but we are also still on military bases. As voting Americans in Italy, Germany, Korea, and Japan, we are honored to be here and are grateful to our leaders for moving such an important piece of legislation and making it number one. We understand that it is the Speaker of the House that determines these earlier numbers. So I want to thank Nancy Pelosi for taking that leadership and having that foresight to say that before and beyond everything else, America's right to vote, the protection of that right, the depth and breadth of those issues must be forefront and foremost. Since the founding of our organization in 1909, to address the issue of unfettered access to the polls, we recognize the challenges throughout our country. We're part of a people that have been locked out too many times for so many reasons. That's why this bill is so important to us. What H.R. 1 does is move the initiative forward to make sure those protections are very well in place. We've lost some stride, as we saw what happened in the Shelby versus Holder decision, where one of the protections in the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act, was virtually eliminated. We must restore that and move to address other issues, including how our voices are very well locked out by the big bucks of multi-billion-dollar corporations and individuals that sing the song so loud and move the picture so brightly that no one else's vote is seen, heard, or counted. And that's why we're also delighted that we're taking on issues like those disenfranchisement tools that come out of the civil rights movement. Issues like former felons being prevented from being able to cast an unfettered vote and have it counted once they paid their debt to society and made sure that they too claim the society overall. It's great to see what just happened in Florida. We need that in the rest of the country as well. If someone's made a mistake, if someone's gone to jail, one of the things that have proven to be very effective is that if they're able to come out and be able to cast an unfettered vote, to have their thoughts, their understandings heard and seen, they're less likely to go back into jail, and we're more likely to see our country advance in the direction that we need it to go. So with that, I want to thank Congressman Sarbanes for providing the kind of leadership that he has. Let me just say that I've never met anyone quite as tenacious as Congressman Sarbanes. when it was time to talk about the misspending of resources and locking people out because of campaign finance and the need for reform, no one has been louder, has been more consistent. Let me just say, the brother would even stop by my office, and I don't live close to Capitol Hill. So with that in mind, we need to move this and make it happen soon. We're moving into a very, very important presidential election. Congressman, I want to thank you and all the other leadership here on Capitol Hill for moving things forward. And I want to also bring to the podium now Neera Tanden.
That was me.
Oh,
Josh is next.
Oh, in that case, my dear friend Josh Horowitz.
I'd go again, but...
I'm Josh Horowitz with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. The Coalition to Stop Gun Violence endorses For the People Act. Americans deserve a government that works for them. H.R. 1 should be passed with bipartisan support and signed into law immediately. H.R. 1 is the perfect piece of legislation to begin this historic session of Congress. The dark money that corrupts politicians and tilts the scales in favor of special interests must be addressed. And no money is darker than the funds funneled from the National Rifle Association's headquarters to Capitol Hill. The past year, with the Russian infiltration of the NRA, we have seen increased concerns about who is actually funding the gun lobby. For the people, this act shines a light on the dark money and curtails corruption. The American people deserve a government that works for them. We strongly encourage the passage of H.R. 1 and thank Congressman Sarbanes for being such a champion. Thank you. And now, Rhea Carey, Executive Director of the National LGBTQ Task Force Action Fund.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for sticking it out here in the cold and soon to be perhaps a little bit of noise in the background of all the ironies. I'm Rhea Carey, the Executive Director of the National LGBTQ Task Force. Thank you, Congressman Sarbanes, for giving all of us a chance to stand up again and again for democracy. I'm here to state clearly and simply that voting rights is an LGBTQ issue. As an historically marginalized community, we know that to have a vote is to have a voice. LGBTQ Americans are affected by a full range of issues at hand in the democratic process, including immigration, reproductive justice, healthcare, affordable housing, and discrimination, just to name a few. Today, we stand with our colleagues representing other movements to urge Congress to move forward on H.R. 1, a bold set of reforms that will serve as a much-needed lifeline to democracy. As an example for our movement, when we allow strict voter ID laws to burden transgender Americans whose gender representation may not match their ID, we lose their input in the democratic process, and that is wrong. It is also unjust. Also unjust is felon disenfranchisement. We believe that Americans are fed up with the racist laws that keep other Americans from voting. For example, as Hillary noted last November, Florida voters, by a very large margin, restored the right to vote to over 1 million individuals with felony convictions in their past who have finished serving their sentences. The Task Force Action Fund was on the ground organizing, and we want to see that change nationwide. The proposed H.R. 1 democracy reforms will amplify LGBTQ voices in important policy debates, and we will elect candidates who recognize the wholeness of our lives and the issues we face. Everyone can agree democracy works best when all communities are able to participate. Thank you. I now bring up Michael Keegan, President and CEO of People for the American Way.
Thank you, Ray. And actually, with this cold, I think we should maybe move the timeline up faster than 2 years to pass this. Anyway, I want to say what an honor it is to be here with Representative Sarbanes as a leader of this, with Katie Porter, and I want to say that, having lived in LA, that if this message can sell in Orange County, it can sell around the country. Also wanted to say what an honor it is to be with the over 125 members of this coalition that are in support of this action. I think it's truly historic, and no better time. I know it might be shocking at a time when voters are blocked from the ballot box in order to shape the outcome of elections, that elected officials are choosing their constituents as opposed to the other way around, that candidates post B-roll footage to help dark money groups funded by billionaires to make better ads against them, and sexual harassment settlements against members of Congress are paid for out of taxpayers' pockets, that people are starting to lose faith in their government. And I'm here on behalf of the 1.5 million members of People for the American Way to speak out in favor of this legislation. This legislation doesn't just represent the will of the people. It is designed to make sure that the voices of the people are actually what gets listened to in Washington. This is very bad news for you if you're a billionaire or a huge corporation, but it's great news if you're an ordinary person or a voter. Americans of all stripes want a government that is more equitable, more transparent, and more participatory, because that's the kind of government that responds to the needs of voters and not just big donors and special interests. That's not going to happen without fixing the problems that H.R. 1 was created to address. Attacks on the right to vote, the flood of big money in our elections, and a broken ethics system. The time is now to get this done. The package is now more important than ever. The clock is ticking. And with the culture of corruption on full display with the current administration, it's crystal clear reform is needed, and it's needed now. There's only one place in America where that is a controversial idea, and that's in Congress. But we're here today to make sure that now is the time for bold action. So on behalf of People for the American Way and our 1.5 million members and activists, I look forward to continuing to fight H.R. 1 and for the reforms that will truly make this a government of, by, and for the people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bishop Garrison. I am a West Point graduate, a former U.S. Army officer and veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom, a former DHS, DOD, and Veterans Affairs appointee, and currently the interim director of the Truman National Security Project. As a national security organization, Truman supports the For the People Act because we know good, inclusive governance is the first step towards making our nation safer while ensuring we remain an effective leader on the world stage. We support these urgent, common sense reforms to reduce disenfranchisement, increase transparency, and fight corruption. Our broken democracy has made us a target for adversaries abroad, including Russian attacks and information warfare against the 2016 and 2018 election process. Thankfully, the provisions of the For the People Act address some critical vulnerabilities. It is important to our national security that we keep dark money out of politics. We demand funding and oversight for election security, and make sure that digital platforms are disclosing who is buying political ads. I urge all members of Congress, not just Democrats, to support the For the People Act. Transparency, accountability, and defense of our institutions should not be partisan issues. It's time for our elected officials to put country over party and ensure that we have a government that lives up to our values. That work begins with the For the People Act. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are minutes away from being able to feel our feet again. So I am Vanita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And our coalition of over 200 national civil and human rights organizations is honored to support H.R. 1, the For the People Act. It represents a transformative vision for American democracy. And I want to thank Congressman Sarbanes and the House Democratic leadership for really infusing hope and integrity back into our politics and institutions. President Trump right now is eroding our democracy, and he has worked to undercut the power of communities of color, immigrants, and those historically excluded from our political process. The For the People Act offers an extraordinary opportunity to fix what is broken and put government back in the hands of the people. And among its bold reforms, H.R. 1 requires nationwide same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, and will restore the voting rights for people with criminal convictions. These policies alone would add millions of voters to the roll. H.R. 1 also includes, very importantly, a pledge to restore the Voting Rights Act. And as the former head of the Civil Rights Division at the Obama Justice Department, the gutting of the VRA was one of the most devastating blows to democracy in recent times. We need to restore its preclearance provision that blocked discriminatory voting practices in states with histories of racial discrimination. And let me be clear. Voting and the ability to participate in democracy is a racial justice issue. It is a civil rights issue. It is an issue of core democracy, and we are overdue for change. The For the People Act will usher in sorely needed era of clean government, and the Leadership Conference will work tirelessly. We'll stay out in cold and stay out in the hot to continue to work with our members and elected leaders to pass this bill and ensure a future where all of our voices are heard. Thank you. And now I will end with the last speaker, Debbie Cease, Federal Campaigns and Legislative Director of the Sierra Club.
Good morning, everyone, and I think I'm the last thing between you and a warmer environment, so let me be really quick here. I first want to thank Congressman Sarbanes, the Democratic leadership, and the whole freshman class for making this possible. The Sierra Club is an environmental organization. We cared passionately about clean air, clean water, finding solutions to climate change. So you might say, why would the Sierra Club think that We the People Act, H.R. 1, is the single most important thing that we may do this Congress for the environment? Let me give you a couple of quick reasons for that. One, we care about clean air, clean water, and finding solutions to climate change, and so does a vast majority of the American public. And the biggest thing standing between the American public and those solutions has been the influence of corporate money in an electoral system that is broken. We need policies that protect people, that protect the land, that protect workers. And until we protect and in fact restore our democratic processes that let voters have access to the polls, that do not let corporate money unduly influence elections, we will not get those things. So for that reason, the Sierra Club is in full support. We join our allies and the co-sponsors of this bill, and we won't stand, or we won't sit, until we see this legislation enacted. Thank you very much.
Actually, one more speaker, which is me. Yesterday, 1.4 million Floridians with former felony convictions gained the right to vote. It's the biggest addition to the voter roll since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. That happened because Florida voters stood up and passed a major democracy reform. But it wasn't just in Florida. Voters have done the same thing in North Dakota and Michigan and Missouri and Seattle and Denver and Baltimore and counties across the state of Maryland. The District of Columbia, through the City Council, passed major fair elections reform last year. There is a democratic resurgence going on across the country, and it's now coming to Washington, D.C., and we will see the passage of H.R. 1, the For the People Act. We can't thank Representative Sarbanes enough for his leadership, but it's not just his leadership that made this possible. Of course, this is a reaction to the most corrupt administration in American history that we're now living under. It's a reaction to the Citizens United decision of 10 years ago, unleashing even more big money into our politics. It's a reaction to the Shelby County decision, gutting the Voting Rights Act, and one of the most shameful displays in recent, or maybe really all, of the jurisprudence of the U.S. Supreme Court. but it is also a reaction to the growing movement across the country demanding democracy reforms. American people do know that it is the failure of our democracy that stands in the way of the agenda that they want. It's not necessarily a progressive agenda, it's an American agenda to provide health care for all, to raise the minimum wage, to deal with the price gouging of pharmaceutical companies, to take on the existential threat of climate change. That agenda has the support of 70, 80, 90% of Americans. The reason we don't get progress is because our political system is broken through corruption and through the undermining of democracy. American people know that. The only thing they support more than the things I just listed is fixing the democracy itself, which gets 90% support in public opinion polls. So we are going to see that majority win, and it's going to win by passing H.R. 1. Not going to debate what's the timetable, is the 2-year or 5-year faction. We are going to pass H.R. 1 in this Congress or the next, but we're not going to wait very long because the American people are demanding it. The Declaration for American Democracy, a coalition of now more than 125 organizations, is going to lead the charge for the reforms here and in the states and in localities. This is a signal moment in American history. We so much appreciate Representative Sarbanes' leadership, and he stands with us through the cold, and we will stand all together until we win these fundamental reforms. When we break right now, if anyone wants to talk to Representative Sarbanes, he's available. Any of us individually will be available. Thank you all very much for turning out.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Hope that was okay.
Wrapping up these remarks this afternoon from Democratic supporters of H.R. 1. You can see it again, along with all of our coverage of the items related to the government shutdown on our website at cspan.org. Type